Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Dunno here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. First, let's look ahead to next week's budget. We're told that the good times are back and everyone in the country is hoping that Finance Minister Michael Noonan will have something for them when he stands up to address the nation. Our farm finance specialist Peter Young asked Declan McAvoy, the head of tax at IFAC Accountants, what farmers can expect.
We've less than a week to go to the budget. Declan, is it going to be a giveaway budget, particularly for farmers?
Yes, it'll be a giveaway for everyone. With an election in the offing, there'll be a little bit for everyone. For farmers, it's publicised at the moment, there'll be a little bit in income tax, increased tax credits. There will be increased thresholds in capital acquisitions tax. And there will be the extension of the reliefs that were due to end in 2015 out for another number of years.
I mean, I've heard a lot of talk about the tax credits, and I know farmers haven't been favoured, or self-employed people haven't been favoured. I mean, what will an increase in the tax credit mean to actually farmers' pockets?
There will be two effects of the increase. First of all, there will be the standard tax credits, which everyone gets, will be increased by a small amount. So that means money in their pocket. If the tax credit is reduced by €100 or increased by €100, there'll be €100 more in the farmer's pocket. But the second credit that's coming in, or that's talked about coming in for farmers and self-employed, is the equivalent of the PAYE employee credit, which they're now talking about bringing in over 5 years to an employee that's worth €1,650 per annum. So they're talking about bringing it in this year, phasing it in with €250 of a credit. That's €250 less tax a farmer would pay in 2016 on his income as against 2015.
You talked about the gift and inheritance tax thresholds. Now, we've seen them nearly halved over the last few years. It's made it quite expensive for some farmers to transfer land. I mean, what are they now, and what do you see them increasing?
Well, the main one at the moment is $225,000 within your own family to your own children. That's $2.25 million of agricultural assets that can be transferred without tax. If it goes up by 50,000 to 275,000, it means there's an extra 500,000 worth of assets that can be transferred. If it goes up to 300,000, an increase of 75,000, it's 750,000 worth of assets. It's needed because of the land price inflation over the last number of years, and it'll remove a lot of people from the inheritance tax, gift tax threshold that are potentially there at the moment.
We saw income averaging going from 3 to 5 year last year. It was going to come in for forestry last year, it was pulled. I mean, they're talking about bringing it in this year. Will that be definite?
Well, at the very last moment, in the Agri Review, it was recommended that it was come in, and it's my opinion that this year, while it's warranted, I've heard that it mightn't come in this year due to problems within the Department of Finance on it.
And looking at, they're talking about a phased transfer scheme as well. I mean, is that getting some air in there? Is that going to come out in the budget?
Well, I was in with meetings in the Department of Agriculture with IFA. Yes, it's getting airing. Whether it'll come in or not, because the Department of Agriculture's position is that a phased transfer delays the transfer, not brings it forward. And they were resisting it from that point of view. But I know the farm organisations were working with the Department of Agriculture to try and bring in something.
So looking overall, we're going to hold on to a lot of the things we've got in the last few budgets, the stock relief, the reduced stamp duty, but we are going to get more.
We are, yes, because, the Agri Review last year came and it gave solidity and certainty for the next 4 or 5 years, and now they're just going to enhance some of the reliefs that had been cut over the last number of years.
And one thing they mentioned in the Agri Review last year was the increased depreciation for energy efficient investments. Is that going to come in?
I don't know on that, but it's needed, and they're all talking about that it is needed because of, if you look at the investment that's going ahead in dairy and look at the modern investment going ahead even in tillage with machinery, tractors and that, to encourage people to buy some of the more energy efficient, more green measures. If they change the allowances on it to 5 years instead of 7 or 8, it will encourage investment, quicker investment.
Thanks very much, Declan. I know you'll be doing an analysis for us after the budget in next week's Farmers Journal, and I look forward to reading a more in-depth view of that.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
In budget season more than any other time, politicians are keen to be associated with good economic news. The opening of Kerry Group's new Global Technology and Innovation Centre in Naas last week was no exception, with An Taoiseach Enda Kenny giving the keynote speech. I attended the event and asked Chief Executive of the Kerry Group, Stan McCarthy, what the expansion meant for the company's original farmer shareholders.
In terms of the business strategy, it's about creating value. So milk is the only raw material that we're vertically integrated with. Our whole business thesis is around adding value, and in this case, adding value to milk. And so if we can add value to milk, then that creates value and obviously creates value for the company, which in turn creates value for the shareholders. Kerry Group, publicly traded company, of which probably 40% or so of the shareholding is held by co-op members since the outset. And so if we can increase the value of Kerry Group, then in essence, over time we will increase the value of their shareholding. But more importantly, back to the dairy farmer, it gives them line of sight or confidence into the future that there is a market being created for their milk. We probably have spent over the last 5 years the same amount of money in the 3 facilities in Newmarket, Charleville and the Stowe. And there is a capital expenditure program further and over the next 3 years to enhance the nutritional standards that are being put into those facilities. So listen, what it is, it's a viable business model from farm all the way through to customer and application. And it's a very important part of the overall group.
Later on, Stan McCarthy addressed the prospect for global dairy markets with Agriculture Minister Simon Coveney. Here's what he had to say.
Our perspective as a processor is that you had a situation where you had mismatch in supply and demand coupled with slowdown, particularly in the fastest growing market for dairy consumption in the world, namely China, and then you had the import embargo put on Russian imports. Combined with a slowdown in some of these economies, you just hit a curve that's not uncommon in commodities. And fair to say that I think that the market overreacted, and what we have seen in the last couple of months, let's say, congruent with the trades that the Minister outlined, is a recalibration or a correction of that overreaction. Fair to say that prices, even currently, are significantly back from the highs of 2013 and 14. The market is slowly beginning to recover, we think. I would concur that it will be in the back half of 16 before we get back to perhaps a more acceptable level.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
I'm joined by our market specialist, Phelim O'Neill, who was in Poland last week. Phelim, you were on a visit of farms as well as government officials last week. What is the situation with agriculture and, more in particular, beef farming in Poland?
Poland is an interesting country from an Irish perspective because after us, they're the next biggest exporter of beef in the European Union. They also would produce a significant quantity of milk. However, the big industry in Poland, the big protein industries, are poultry and pork. And the reason for that is, I suppose, unlike Ireland, Poland is primarily a grain-producing country. 3/4 of the landmass is in arable. And that's fed essentially to a very big pig and a very big poultry industry. They produce 1.6 million tonnes of each annually, most of which is consumed on the domestic market. Poles would consume 35 kilos per person annually of pork and 27 kilos per person of chicken. However, they consume a minuscule amount of beef, just 1.5 kilos per person. So that's the reason, even though Poland only produces 300,000 tonnes of beef annually, they actually export most of that abroad and that's what makes them, after Ireland,
because the demand simply isn't there.
There's simply no home market for beef. The beef industry in Poland is essentially a byproduct of their dairy industry. They produce about 12 billion litres of milk annually, 90% of which is consumed in the home market, but as I say, they don't consume any of their beef worth.
So there's no a specific suckler herd in Poland, but are there moves on to change that, or is the beef sector always going to be driven by what's coming out of the dairy sector?
Well, I suppose given the land use in Poland, which is 3/4 arable production, logic dictates that that's fed as opposed to the intensive sectors of pork and poultry. So it's not really a country for ruminant livestock as such. Cattle that are fed in Poland are actually fed with grain grown by each individual farmer on their farm. We had the opportunity to visit 5 farms during our time there, and the method was repeated across all of them, where you had basically what we would consider now in Ireland very small dairy cow herds, 30 to 40 cows. They would be at the very top end of the Polish market. They'd be in the top 20% of Polish producers at that level. And I suppose the other very interesting feature from all of the farms that we visited was the fact that cattle never seen outside. They spend their entire life tied, if you like, in the traditional Irish cowshed or byre way in stands. They are certainly indulged with lots of straw bedding, and the manure then is removed, in most cases manually, stored in piles and ploughed back into the arable land that goes in for next year's crop production. Yeah.
Of course, Poland was part of the Soviet bloc. Are there any scars still remaining on the landscape, on the farming side of things?
I suppose a generation has passed now since that time, as the Poles actually celebrated 25 years of their own independent government last year, and Poland was slightly different from the other Soviet bloc countries in that there never was the same degree of collective farming. About 25% or so of the landmass would have been in large sort of government-controlled farms, but there remained a very, very big sort of private agriculture sector in Poland. And I suppose that's still reflected right through to this day, where, and we're talking about absolutely tiny farms here. Half of all Polish farms are less than 5 hectares. So that means that those people are producing just a couple of cattle, a few pigs, a few birds. It's a very traditional, what we would consider as a Bose old-fashioned system. They've no march structure in Poland. Cattle and pigs usually spend their entire life on the farm that they're born on until they're ready to go to the factory. And for those small micro-businesses, as we would call them, factories don't have a direct engagement with them. There would be a dealing culture that would travel around the country with scales on the back of lorries, and they would have a deal with a farmer, weigh the cattle, weigh the livestock, and it would be basically a hand shaken off and paid in cash. So it's a totally different way of doing business in the vast majority of cases. But I suppose that sort of basic low volume trading system did prevail throughout the communist era.
Talk to me then, Phelim, about financially, is farming viable for those type of small farmers in Poland? And how reliant are they on subsidies?
First of all, the subsidy arrangement, actually, in terms of the coupled payment on beef cattle, that's paid on up to 30 cattle per farm business. But interestingly, it's not paid on the ultra small business. You have to have a minimum of 3 cattle to get. So the subsidies, the €70 coupled payment, is paid on between 3 and 30 cattle per farm business. If you have 300 cattle in the farm business, you still get paid on the 30, but that's it. In terms of the economics of it, I suppose what makes the model work particularly well is that all of the animal feed is actually grown in or around the farm business and in the livestock production units. All of their own grain, their sugar beet, their maize, their fodder, any grass that have is cut and baled as hay and fed as an alternative forage to maize. So that means that they have low cost inputs, and also in the context of labour, like I believe the annual industrial wage in Poland is something like €400 or €500 per month. So in terms of wage earning opportunities off farm, they're pretty limited as well. And if you look at a situation where Poland would be reporting at the moment that their milk price is in the order of 35 cents per litre, which seems extraordinary in relation to here, but that is what the Polish Dairy Federation would have confirmed to us. They have primarily a liquid domestic milk market for themselves, so we can understand and see that probably it's a fairly self-contained business in that context. Their beef is about €1 a kilo cheaper than Ireland, but their production costs would be considerably less as well.
Overall, when you say that high milk prices, beef prices are a little bit behind ours, but largely self-sufficient, is Poland a sleeping giant in terms of agriculture and agricultural produce exporting to the global market?
Well, certainly their production curve across all sectors has been on an upward trend in recent years, and I've no doubt there is still scope to expand that. However, there are a number of drawbacks as well. Whilst it's essentially a flat country and lends itself to arable production, it does have a few, I suppose, what we would call environmental factors that work against them. Typically, they would have a very low rainfall, often less than 500 millimetres a year in many regions. They would have their soils, it would be known as very light quality soils, not the most fertile. They have very, very long winters, 4 months perhaps with sub-zero temperatures, although this last couple of winters have been noticeably milder. And then very often their summer months are characterised by long periods of drought and heat waves. So it's a far from what we would look at as sort of an all-year-round growing season. There are a lot of production difficulties. But having said that, new varieties of crop, consolidation of farms, the businesses are getting bigger, they're getting more productive. And yes, it is a country with considerable scope to expand. They do have a strong, potentially strong domestic market. It's already very well served in terms of pork and poultry, where they consume an awful lot of what they produce. The reason that they're a player in the international beef market is simply because they don't eat beef. Now, and the Polish economy has been developing over the years, it's the one country in the European Union that avoided recession in 2008 when everyone else was hit, including ourselves. It is an economy that has been in development, and I suppose it's a feature of economies around the world. As they become more affluent, beef consumption tends to grow, so they have considerable potential when they're starting off with the low base that they have at the minute of growing that market.
Looking forward, Phil, if we were sitting here in 10 years' time, do you think that there'll be further developments in the beef sector, or will it be business as usual, small holdings, largely self-sufficient but not much on the export scale for all the other sectors?
It would certainly be government policy to see production move out of the small micro farm business units into the larger ones, and that's their ambition. Their target at the moment is to grow, I suppose, the middle sector in the 30 to 50 hectares group, to have those expand, for those who acquire more of the land base around them and grow their businesses. There's no doubt they can achieve tremendous further growth in terms of output per cow. Like, I think their dairy output something in the order of 5,200 litres on average per cow. There is scope for further expansion there, and as that industry grows, so also potentially does the beef industry as the byproduct of that dairy industry. They have considerable amounts of grain produced annually, so they have certainly scope to feed lots more beef cattle should they choose to go that way.
And Phil, you covered the first part of your series on agriculture in Poland in this week's Irish Farmers Journal, and you'll have more on it in the next few weeks?
Yeah, this week's edition of the Irish Farmers Journal concentrates very much on the overview of Polish agriculture and the discussion that we had with the Consul General in the Ministry of Agriculture in Poland, where we managed to get her views on TTIP and a range of global trade issues, including their position on hormones and I suppose her support of the precautionary principle in terms of use of hormones in Europe. Next week's edition will look in specifically at the farms.
Great, Phil, thanks very much, and we can read more about it in this week's Farmers Journal and on www.farmersjournal.ie. And while we're on the subject of beef production, a lot of information meetings on the Beef Data and Genomics Programme, or BDGP, are currently taking place around the country. We're covering them in the Irish Farmers Journal, both in print and online. If you still have any questions about the scheme, you can tweet us using the hashtag AskIFJ, and our specialists will answer them in next week's podcast.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
This time of year is not only budget season, it is also the planting season for tillage farmers. Journalist Paula Melvin met Meathman Howard Dehane as he started sowing winter wheat in the past few days.
Today we're going to sow winter wheat, and the variety is JB Diego, and it'll be going in at 9.5 stone per acre.
And why did you select that variety of wheat?
That's a wheat that we've been sowing for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's a very reliable variety, one of the top yielders with very manageable disease characteristics.
There is actually a huge difference between the various varieties, aren't there?
There's a reasonable difference. Some varieties are more prone to septoria and various other diseases, but JB Diego is a good one. It yields well, and it's easy to manage.
It sounds very exotic. Where's it from, do you know?
It's a UK variety.
We collected the wheat that's about to be sown. I was very surprised that it's nearly a pinky reddy colour.
Well, that's the dressing that's on the seed wheat. It's a dressing they put on for moulds and fusariums and diseases like that.
So you said this variety is very good for not becoming infected, and you said there that obviously it's treated beforehand. Another big difference between the breeds, I believe, is the straw that comes from them.
Yeah, some straws are longer, some are weaker, would lodge easier, but they're all in or around the same. Some you just have to be a little bit more careful with nitrogen and that, and depending if it's a very fertile site, you mightn't want a variety that's going to lodge easily on you.
And is it the way you spread the nitrogen? Is that the difference between the closer to the root, how better it would be for the plant?
No. The rain would wash that in. That would have no impact. I suppose the amount of nitrogen that you would put on would be the determining factor there.
The rain has a huge effect on sowing. We're here in Kilbride, County Meath, and the sun is out. It's a fabulous day here. That obviously affects sowing, I'd imagine.
Well, yeah, the ideal thing is to have it sown in nice dry conditions, no compaction, and this is a perfect day for sowing.
And is it, in terms of other conditions that'd be perfect for sowing, what was in this field last? You obviously practice crop rotation, you also do a lot of spuds.
We do, we practice crop rotation, but in this field now, we are sowing wheat now for a number of years. It's continuous wheat, and the yields are quite reasonable, so we're happy to stick with wheat for here. But on the farm, we do rotate between winter barley, spring wheat, potatoes, and obviously winter wheat would be our main variety. Our main crop is winter wheat.
Do you mainly prefer working with the wheat as opposed to the potatoes, given that it might be harder to plough considering you have to go deeper?
Yeah, no, it's all. I don't mind working with potatoes. Is more labour intensive. It's harder on the ground. You're tilling the ground more. The earthworms don't like it. It's a harder crop on land in general, but it's part of the rotation and it's part of the crops that we're set up for. So we have to stick with it.
Thank you very much, Howard.
Thank you, Paula. You're very welcome.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Finally, this week's Irish Country Living is reporting on the work of Recovery Haven, an organisation that has been offering cancer patients and their families tremendous support in the past few years. Maria Moynihan and Mary Phelan have all the details.
Now, Maria, when we think about cancer treatment, we think about hospitals, doctors, a clinical setting really. But what about the emotional scars that are left by a cancer diagnosis? This week you wrote about a kind of innovative and voluntary cancer support centre in Tralee, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the centre is Recovery Haven down in Tralee. Actually, they were winners of the Dairymaster Rural Innovation Award. And to give you a bit of background, it was set up by Marion Barnes, the breast care support nurse in Tralee General Hospital, and she could see that, I suppose, there was a lot of support in terms of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, that sort of thing, but nowhere where people could go for emotional support. So started a committee, started fundraising, and in 2010 the doors opened inside in Recovery Haven, and since then, in the last 5 years, over 700 people plus their families and friends would have received fantastic support in the centre, all for free, no state funding.
Wow, that's really impressive. So what exactly do they offer here? What do they do for patients?
So, there's a range of services, but I suppose basically, everybody can avail of up to 8 free sessions of counselling, which is provided through a grant through the Irish Cancer Society. They also have a team of 100 volunteers providing everything from Reiki to reflexology, and you can have as many appointments really as you need, I suppose, with this, that's assessed on an individual basis. Then there's different groups. There's a social walking club, there's classes in mindfulness, meditation, trained listener service, and also support groups for men and women, and the men's group is actually very interesting.
Tell me a bit more about that. Do they tailor programs specifically towards men? Do they have maybe slightly different needs to women?
Yeah, so this grew out of a prostate cancer program, and actually the demand for the men's group came from the men themselves, which I was a bit surprised by, because I suppose we have this stereotypical idea, I suppose, that people try and battle things up and get on with it, but it actually meets twice a month. The women's group meets once a month, and so basically I spoke to one man, and he has prostate cancer, and he shares his story in the paper, and it was interesting. He said, like, the cancer journey without Recovery Haven would be like going on a journey without a roadmap, kind of gives you the directions. And he said, look, it's just a chance for him and other men to meet up and chat, talk about the good times, the not so good times. And he's a very poetic turn of phrase, I suppose. He said, cancer, you just don't treat it with tablets and radium. You have to look after your emotional, spiritual needs. He kind of compared it to an apple growing in an orchard without the light or the rain, and you have to look at it from a holistic point of view. So it was very interesting to have that conversation.
He sounds very eloquent. You mentioned the Lakela bereavement group as well, so maybe tell me a bit about that.
Sure. So obviously when somebody's going through cancer, the focus is on the sick person, obviously, and the people who are caring for them. I suppose that's their focus. But if that person unfortunately passes away, you can imagine their whole life has changed, but other people will move on, friends and family move on, and where do you go then? And I suppose you think of a cancer support centre, you think of the person person with cancer. But at Recovery Haven, family and friends are just as welcome. So I did speak to both a man and a woman who'd lost their husband and wife, and just what it means to them to be able to go in that night, whenever they feel like, and just to talk to people who know exactly how they feel, and that it just gives them somewhere, I suppose, to open up. They feel like they can't be talking to their family and friends about the same things all the time, but this is a great way to meet. They have social occasions as well. But really, it's just a support group in their own community.
Wow, it really does sound fantastic. And it sounds like, even though this is a centre, for those going through cancer and what can be very, very tough times, that it's quite a positive place.
Yeah, and you really feel like going in the door. There's a real sense of peace there, and it's beautifully decorated. It's not a clinical setting. It's very homely. They describe it really as a home, and it's not patients, it's guests or visitors. And everybody I did meet, so they always leave with a spring in their step, and you can imagine when you're leaving hospital, it could be bad news, you're not obviously going out very happy a lot of the time, but this is, I suppose, it is on the positive and making you, I suppose, feel as well as you can and support you through that. And as well, I suppose the focus as well is on survivorship, because while we hear a lot about cancer rates, there's also more people surviving with cancer, living with cancer, living well after cancer. And this is very much the focus at Recovery Haven, is to promote that, even if you're going through cancer at a very difficult time, there are things that can help you live with it and live that little bit better, bring a bit of comfort, and when you get through it, that there's those supports as well afterwards. When the hospital appointments and everything else falls away, there's somewhere you can still go, and the door is always open.
Okay, well, it sounds like a really lovely place, and if you're interested in learning more about this, you can read about it in this week's Country Living and on our website at farmersjournal.ie.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday. Brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.